We'll wait another minute or so. But yeah, so good to see you all.
Same.
And Pilar is with us this morning. It's such a beautiful day, and it's such a pleasure and honor to have you with us. So thank you.
Everyone.
Yeah.
So happy to be with you.
So as I mentioned to you, Pilar, that we're folks from many different traditions. I would say in the background for me is psychology and also the Christian and Buddhist practice that we've talked about before, and also I would say the perennial tradition, Aldous Huxley and so on, looking for wisdom wherever we find it. And very often when we're together, we find it in each other, and that's why we're here, building a community of that's headed toward beloved community, what Martin Luther King called the beloved community. So we're gonna begin with silence, but before we go into the silence, and Pilar, do you feel okay about leading us?
Sure.
Great. Okay. Well, why don't we just start with that then? We'll start with silence, and make sure there are a couple more people coming here. Okay.
So perhaps as we're transitioning into this time of noble silence, I just invite you to take a moment or two first, even just to notice your environment. I mean, sometimes we rush to arrive at our Zoom Sangha, so just to really allow your gaze to scan the room that you're in, just so that your body has a moment or two to feel a little more connected and settled. And if you have an image or a shrine, anything where you'd like to just allow your gaze to rest for a moment or two, to connect with that image. And then you can begin to just find a posture that feels comfortable, but also allows you a sense of energy, of wakefulness. Just giving your body again a few moments to connect with your chair or your cushion or the sofa. And then as we enter into noble silence, just imagining your mind finding a place of rest on the breath as you begin to observe the various sensations of the breath throughout the body. Knowing that if at any point throughout this time of silence your mind is active or wandering, that's okay. Just to note where it's gone, and then with gentleness and ease, you can guide it back to the breath. And so we'll sit quietly together.
So, well, welcome everyone. I just want to say just a couple words about Pilar Jennings. And Pilar, you've had a really fascinating dual practice of psychiatric work with kids and adults, and a practice of Tibetan Buddhism, a devotional practice. You also have a lot of experience in Vipassana, what we call mindfulness meditation, Buddhist meditation. So 11 years ago, it's wonderful to remember, and it's also kind of scary to remember that was already 11 years ago. We focused on an issue that you discuss in your first book, which is this one, Mixing Minds, the Power of Relationship in Psychoanalysis and Buddhism. And one thing you've noticed is that many Americans who take up a Buddhist practice mistakenly understand it as strictly individualistic one, focused primarily on what's happening in our own minds, on the cushion, and so on. But in your psychiatric practice, and I think in your own life, you notice the fundamental importance of relationship, especially our early relationships, and how they can shape our current experience in relationships. So today, topic is intimacy. And I'm curious to know what, in your years of Tibetan Buddhist practice, your work with adults and children in New York City, you've learned about intimacy. And also, as a side question, I've been this morning thinking, can you say something about intimacy with oneself and intimacy with others? Is there a boundary there? So there you go, and you've got 30 minutes or whatever to speak, and then we'll have a little time for Q&A and discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonas. Again, so happy to have this opportunity to meet you all and spend time with you in practice and conversation this morning. And I mean, certainly I have found throughout my spiritual life that the resources we find in all faith traditions, for me, I've found spiritual resources in the Buddhist tradition are just boundlessly healing if we work with them, right, patiently and skillfully. And probably you have found throughout the last several years of extreme crisis, right? It really has felt like it's one extreme crisis after another, that these resources are indispensable, right? Because they offer us a way to imagine sustaining connection, sustaining meaningful relationship with self and others, even in the midst of turbulence and radical change. For some reason this morning, as I was getting ready to be with you, my mind was just reflecting back to the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm here in New York City, where I've lived throughout my life and have been practicing psychoanalysis and Tibetan Buddhism. And it did feel like in the US it was the eye of the COVID storm. And it was fascinating. I mean, as frightening and distressing as it was also fascinating, because it felt as though reality as we knew it changed overnight. And there was even a designated day. Of course, it had changed before March 14, but for some reason that was the designated beginning of the pandemic. And so on March 13th, which I think was a Friday, the supermarkets were packed. I mean, it's ironic, right? We all squished ourselves into small spaces to get ready. And then we went into lockdown, right? We decided Saturday, March 14, we have a new reality and we have to grapple with it. And of course, it's always been so that our sense of reality can change very quickly. Right? And for many of us, it's alarming. It's just a lot to have to open to and learn about and tolerate, recover from. So I find myself just feeling depths of gratitude for the practices, for the teachings in the Buddhist tradition. And so I thank you, Jonas, for this topic of intimacy, because it has felt, I think, for many people that we're living through a time of radical isolation, right? Whether from groups, whole groups, or from loved ones, or even from the self we used to know before a time of crisis. So it's very helpful, I find, to just reflect on what does it mean to be intimate with self and others. And so perhaps as a starting point, I'll just note that in both the Buddhist tradition and the psychoanalytic tradition, there's this wonderful shared understanding that the mind matters most. It has an ultimate healing property in these traditions. But we really do need relationships in which to nurture the mind. Right? We have these capacities. In the Buddhist tradition, it's suggested that we're all endowed with a supreme intelligence. It's sometimes described in Buddhist psychology or the Abhidharma as a layer of the mind that is extraordinarily spacious and by its nature non-reactive. So that's the part of the mind that can simply notice what's happening, right? Can simply notice that on March 14, reality as we have known it, depending on where we were in the world, is changing. Of course, you've probably been through many other significant changes and stressors and challenges. But in Buddhist psychology, it's suggested that our mind really does have the ability to notice what's happening and not get locked into a reactive, habituated response to it. Yeah. In the psychoanalytic tradition, there's a similar understanding that we have an ornate mind, right, with a conscious segment and a unconscious segment, and that we can skillfully learn to build bridges between these layers of the mind so that we're no longer pushed around by what we're holding in our minds, but we can actually consciously be in relationship to it, to nurture more intimacy to what we're holding in our mind, so that it's not distressing us, right? It's not repetitively wreaking havoc, but actually fodder for curiosity, right? I mean, this is again a shared understanding in the traditions that there's a way to work with the mind, given the natural capacity that we all have, so that we're actually leading with a sense of wonder. What is it we're going to discover? What is it we're going to get close to or become familiar with? And in both traditions, for me, this is a beautiful meeting point of the traditions. We simply need to find the relational experiences that help nurture those capacities of our mind. Yeah. So even though the Dharma, or Buddhist psychology, is I think, fundamentally a much more optimistic tradition, it says we are all indiscriminately endowed with these capacities, right, of supreme intelligence, non-reactive awareness. We're basically genius learners. We just don't know it, right? We get overly identified with our suffering, which is very human struggle. But if we can learn to work with the suffering, what we get in touch with is this remarkable layer of mind. And so in the Buddhist tradition, what's been recommended is that we find mentors. We find people who have absolute confidence that our mind is endowed with everything we need in order to navigate life with trust, with the ability to recover from our struggles, because it is, alas, it's a part of the human condition to have moments of real struggle. We all know it. We've all had many forms of suffering. And so in Buddhist psychology, it's recommended that we find people like Jonas and Margaret and others, probably many of you here, with whom we can start to bolster trust in our own minds. But interestingly, it suggested we can't do that entirely on our own. And so there is an interesting tension in the tradition. It suggests that everything we need is within the mind, but we also need another to basically jumpstart all those capacities and to nurture them, right? To really build them so that they're much more easily accessible. They don't just recede into the background when we're stressed, or when we're not accessing what we've longed for. And then beautifully, I think, in the analytic tradition, there's a similar idea that if we can find healing relationships where we're greeted with trust, with respect, with love, even though in the psychiatric and the analytic tradition, yes, they don't talk about love enough, but we all know that healing doesn't happen without love. And the most skillful clinicians do tend to be very loving, right? They greet their clients, their patients, with a quality of openness, of receptivity. Just a genuine wish to learn more about it all, right? The most sequestered parts of someone's experience, the most unseemly parts, it's all invited in. Yeah. And so similarly in the analytic tradition, there's this notion that if we spend enough time in that kind of relationship, then we'll have the opportunity to internalize the experience so that we're starting to carry that quality of intimacy and be able to offer it to ourselves and to others. Yeah. And so in a way, there's a real respect for our need. We have a profound, I would say, existential need for others, right? But especially healing others, people who can show up and see in us, however you want to articulate it, I would say our Buddha nature, that we are a child of God. Again, whatever language works for you. Right, so that we start to disidentify with our neuroses. Right, often we're very identified with our neuroses. I mean, as a third-generation New Yorker, I am very identified with my neuroses. It's just in my DNA. It's part of why I love Buddhist psychology and psychoanalysis, because both traditions are saying it's okay. Of course, we struggle, and sometimes those repetitive patterns of struggle start to feel very neurotic, very entrenched. But actually, there is a way to disidentify slowly, so that we become able to see ourselves more fully. Yeah. So, in a way, both of these healing relationships, and they're very intimate, right? Whether you're working with a spiritual mentor or you're working with a clinician, these are meant to be very close, of course boundaried, but very close relationships where there is the opportunity to feel found. I mean, so often we suffer the most when we walk through life feeling that we haven't been sufficiently found. Right? We have a sense that we're carrying a lot within us, but it has remained too private. Right? And often there is an almost gnawing wish, a longing. I would say it's a primordial longing to feel more fully found by another. And that's what these two healing relationships can offer. Right? The sense that someone else is recognizing, yeah, you are an extraordinary person, endowed with all sorts of gifts and capacities. Many of them might be fully unconscious, but that's okay. That's part of the function of the unconscious, is to hold those untapped gifts. And we're going to take our time to recognize them. Yeah. And it's in part for this reason that developmental researchers and mother-infant researchers over the last 20, 30, maybe 40 years at this point, grew very interested in the importance of recognition. Right? Since babies are always reading faces, they're masters at reading faces, they're really reading cues for the caregiver's capacity to see the infant. Right? They need to feel found, they need to feel seen. And interestingly, they equally need to feel that the person they are dependent upon is being seen by them, can recognize that they are being seen by them, right? So Jessica Benjamin and others describe this as patterns of mutual recognition, that this is really what's longed for. I mean, in a way, you could say this is intimacy. I see you, you see me, I see you seeing me, right? You see me seeing you, and then something can grow, right? Some third wonderful, multifaceted, complex, ornate reality can grow between these two people. Yeah. And so 2,600 years ago, even the historical Buddhists said, yeah, I mean, this was long before we had mother-infant research. It's true. We need to feel found, and we need mentors who recognize what we're carrying in our minds, who can nurture what we're carrying, right? Because the first, I would say, key ingredients is that sense of being seen, but then we really need some help nurturing what's been found, so that it doesn't remain too subtle, right? Because often that's what happens. We have these gifts, we have a capacity, and maybe you know it from your sitting practice, right? It's very interesting when we're going through something that's gripping, right? Where, especially if it's something we just think this is too much. And I would say the last 2 years have been too much. The last 6 years before that, right? There's often the sense of too muchness. But it's fascinating that when we then just sit, right? The way Jonas helped us just gather and just sit, even when our external circumstances don't change at all, the state of mind can change, right? We can start to drop down into those deeper layers of the mind And then there can be the sense that, well, it's okay. I mean, it's simply reality. May not be what I would have chosen or wanted for myself and for others, but it is reality. Yeah. And so the more we can nurture intimacy with that part of the mind that's able to open to our reality, often the less we'll suffer. But again, we usually need healing mentors to help us along the way. Yeah. Now, what healing mentors are looking for in these traditions is, of course, different, right? In the Buddhist tradition, they're looking for that layer of mind that's receptive, that's non-reactive, that's endowed with curiosity, that has wisdom and insight. Part of what I love about the analytic tradition is that the mentor is looking for the full, complex, and very personal truth of what someone has lived through. And I have found that there's a lot of compassion in that approach, right? Because so often we do try to work out the most complicated parts of our experience on our own. Yeah. I still notice, I was just reflecting on my own tendencies recently, there is a pretty strong protective tendency in me when things become especially ornate. There is a part that says, try to work this out. Don't saddle others with this. See what you can do. Harness the powers of your mind. Chew on this. Try to think it through. Right? Contain. But in a way, the beauty of the analytic tradition is this notion that it's all grist for the mill. Right? Whatever it is, whatever trauma, whatever struggle, whatever failure, whatever neurosis, it's welcomed into that intimate relational field. And I do think that's a beautiful model for relationship. Yeah. Because so often, again, I notice this in myself, there's a powerful belief that it would be better if there was some aspect of my being that got worked out and wasn't quite so present and problematic, right? And often there is that nagging expectation of others. It would be better if, they could listen the way I need them to, they could respond the way I need them to, they could not gaze out the window just when I'm getting to the point of my argument. And often there's a litany, right? We're waiting for them to get with the program and be a better partner, friend, therapist, mentor, you name it. And so in a way, in the analytic tradition, and of course this is true in the Buddhist tradition, but it's very explicit in the analytic tradition, the idea is we're gonna stay the course, bring the fullness of who we are to the encounter, and see if we can work this out. We're going to stay the course. Now, of course, that is not easy to do. And it does require, for me, values and resources I found in the Buddhist tradition. The upaya, the skillful means. One of the central skillful means is patience, which is basically translated as tolerance. Can I simply tolerate something that I don't like? And I would say this is an invaluable capacity in intimate relationship. And sometimes we have to tolerate things we don't like in ourselves that are brought forth in relationship. And we then are inclined to blame the other for bringing them forth. Why do you turn me into such a nutcase? Right? If you were more skillful, more attuned, etc., then I could be more skillful and attuned. It's just a very tempting, right, perspective or narrative. So the skillful means of patience, it's a method, right? It's a method for both building intimacy and then sustaining it. Yeah, building it and sustaining it. And I have learned both personally and clinically, this is what we seem to long for. Yeah. Intimacy with self and other that is abiding, right? That isn't so fickle, that isn't so fragile. Yeah. And probably some of us have really felt that truth throughout the pandemic, where there was a lot of enforced separation, right? And you may have really felt a new awareness or a heightened awareness of the need, the need to feel close to others, right? And the need to feel that you can bring the truth of how you're doing to that closeness. Yeah. So perhaps lastly, because I would love to hear from you and love to hear how this is resonating or landing or whatever questions that are generated, but maybe just lastly, I want to just touch on one of the teachings in Buddhist psychology that I love, because for me it's endlessly challenging, is the teaching of equanimity. Yeah, equanimity. And this is very connected to intimacy, because it's this idea that we can cultivate loving feelings not just for the people who love us back, right? Not just for the people we have personal relationship with and a harmonious relationship with, but ultimately for the people with whom we tend to just not have much feeling for at all, which is most people, right? I mean, if there are 7.5 approximately billion people in the world, we know such a minuscule fraction of the human family. I can count right on one or two hands the number of people I know really well. And so this teaching of equanimity says, stay the course, build the patience, get to know how extraordinary your mind is. Because the more you do that, the more you're going to be able to tap into genuine feelings of love and compassion for an ever-expanding group of people, right? Including the many, many people in this world we don't know well. It's so important, right? And even, and this is hard for most folks, it's hard for me, the people with whom we have really suffered, right? And this is not an invitation to bypass that suffering or to be masochistic at all, but to really imagine what it's like to just tap into some feeling of respect or compassion for the people with whom we've had conflict. Doesn't mean we like their behavior, right? But that we can default to that state of mind of curiosity and openness and love and respect, if we just stay the course. So on that note, I'd love to pause and just hear from you, see if you have any questions or thoughts, reflections.
I'd like to begin, Pilar. Thank you. No, that was wonderful. Just to be with you is wonderful. Heartfelt presence. You remind me of a theologian from Fordham, and now I can't remember his name, who said that the basic mantra in the Christian tradition is, I see you, I know you, and I love you. So I see you in the way that you described. I see you, you see me. And I know a lot about, I know mistakes you've made and so on and so forth. I know you and I love you. That really is, for me, a beautiful mantra that I carry. I want to ask you something about this great book. I keep reading it. This book, Mixing Minds, I tell you, 11 years ago, I read it fully and I underlined just about, I don't know if you can see it. I've underlined everything. Well, I just want to read something to you that you wrote and see if you have a comment on this before we go to the whole group. And here you're speaking about what you've learned about through mindfulness meditation, which we spoke about 11 years ago a lot, quite a bit. I propose that mindfulness training can sometimes encourage practitioners to let go of mental content too quickly before it is mined for the gold it offers when honored as valuable psychic information. I suspect, too, that for practitioners who have not benefited from psychoanalytic or psychotherapeutic work, it's an ongoing temptation to confuse mindfulness of one's emotional states with fully felt and integrated feeling. It seems plausible that this confusion may have something to do with the jarring discrepancy that exists in practitioners who simultaneously exhibit an almost saccharine spiritual persona, which seems to float loftily above the human realm. I love that. And undercurrents of passive aggression, depression, and manipulative sexual desire, which all come out sideways when we just let go, as if that's the only mantra in the world. So I wonder if can you respond to your own comment?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Jonas. Yeah. I mean, I was practicing Buddhism long before I became a clinician. And so I was really struck, and I was around clinicians. My mother's a therapist, so I was always around clinicians as a child and had a sense that there was the psyche, and I had a sense that there was an unconscious. And as I was getting older, and also just more familiar with spiritual communities, including spiritual teachers, some of whom were extraordinarily wise and insightful, and struggling with unworked through traumas and addictions and desires that would sometimes get enacted. I mean, if you study any group, it's the rare group in which there isn't something getting enacted because it isn't being consciously dealt with. And I was seeing both the beauty of mindfulness practice and the psychological pitfalls, that it could be used protectively. And of course, many people had been weighing in on this struggle of spiritual bypassing for decades before it was something I was observing. But I was seeing the way in which it might be used to get distance from emotional, affective arising, right? I mean, and let's face it, emotions are usually pretty stormy. I mean, especially emotions like rage, or desire, right, or fury, right? That it's not subtle. Yeah, And so it just occurred to me that there might be some opportunity to work with mindfulness so that it is actually allowing for, the storm while containing, right? But there's a real dance there between containment and allowing that a lot of spiritual practitioners that I observed didn't have the support for. So that it ended up looking like splitting or detaching or squelching, reducing, rather than allowing for.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
So let's open it up, and what comes up for you in being with Pilar in this way today, this beautiful spring day? Yeah, Annie.
Good morning. This is pretty basic, but could you say more about what you mean when you talk about mind?
Sure.
And yeah,
Was there another part to the?
I I'm sorry I didn't start off by saying I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. And is it Anne or Annie?
Well, I go by Annie.
Annie. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, mind in the Buddhist tradition it's pretty ornate. Um, if you read commentaries on Buddhist psychology, the Abhidharma, you find an incredibly nuanced, sophisticated description of the mind. But simply put, you could think of it as having two factions. You have main mind or basic mind, which is that layer of mind that is clear seeing and spacious, non-reactive. And then you have the mental factors. And the mental factors are our relationship with and our reaction to the various forms of stimuli, right? What we see, what we hear, what we feel, right? What the body experiences. And so what we're doing in the Buddhist tradition is trying to kind of map out, track what happens with those mental factors. What are our patterns, right? With what we hear and see and feel, etc. And then how to, again, nurture. It's almost, I sometimes think of it as a vertical model, relationship to that deeper main mind of clear seeing. And in the analytic tradition, you could think of mind or psyche as being a combination of the conscious part of the mind in which we can reflect, we can think about, we have memories that we can access, and the part of the mind that wields a lot of power, but we struggle to consciously connect with it. And it might, according to Freud, I'm not a Freudian, but I think he was right, it might make itself known in our dreams. It might make itself known in our compulsions, right? Because consciously we're thinking, tonight I'll have some kale and a piece of salmon, and then I'll pray and I'll go to bed. But then, lo and behold, having a bowl of pasta and some vegan ice cream, and I'm on the 5th episode of Netflix or whatever the thing is. Right, so there's a little indication that there might be a part of the mind that has its own agenda, it's its own longings. And so, again, the process in the analytic tradition is just to build bridges slowly between the conscious layers of mind and the unconscious layers of mind. Yeah.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up question, but I don't want to take too much space here. The theologians that I'm really interested in the Christian tradition right now are really emphasizing the heart as the source of spiritual perception. And I just don't hear the word heart in what you talk about. And I'm not saying that I don't see a lot of heart in what you're talking about, but it isn't, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
thank you. Beautiful. Well, I love that. One thing I will say is, interestingly, when we do our prostrations, we start here, here. So up here, we're basically praying to the body. This indicates kind of the body of the Buddhas, the speech of the Buddhas, and the mind of the Buddhas. So the mind is really located in the heart region.
I see. Yes.
And
that's
in
helpful.
the Tibetan cosmology, when you're really trying to work toward awakening, you work with the subtle body and what's found in the heart region. So thank you.
That's very helpful, and I'm not surprised to hear exactly what you said. I just needed a connection there.
Yeah, thank you. David, hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining us. It's been delightful to hear from you. So you've mentioned the mentor, the importance of the mentor a number of times this morning. And it made me wonder, well, what mentors you've had and what lineages you feel close to. And I'll just pause there for a second, but I'm very curious about that.
Sure. Thank you so much, David. Yeah, so I've had several mentors in both traditions. In the Buddhist tradition, I've been practicing in the Sakya lineage of Tibetan Buddhism for several decades. And my teacher is a wonderful person named Khenpo Pema Wangdak.
Okay.
Yeah. He was born in Tibet and then was in a refugee camp as a young child when he and his family needed to leave Tibet. And then became a monastic when he was about 7, and then was sent to New York City as a young man to start a Sakya center. And ended up in an apartment above the Cotton Club in Harlem. And is just a wonderful human being, someone who I've learned from endlessly over the years, and just continues to be a source of inspiration. He's obviously, as you can already hear from his biography, someone who has suffered a great deal and had a lot of personal loss. On Mother's Day, when we all gathered, he gave us an incredible Dharma talk about how in Tibetan culture, people don't expect their mothers to be nice to them. So they don't end up suffering the way Westerners do. And we were all thinking, this is very interesting and worth considering what it would be like to let go of some of our lifelong expectation of our mothers.
Mm-hmm.
Very inspiring talk. But then at the end of the talk, he said, even at this old age, I still miss my mother. So that's part of his beauty. He just reveals the truth. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
He's just honest.
He's just honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds great. The fact that he came into New York City and lived there, and that because the Tibetan tradition does not really deal with the mind or the psyche or have a psychological approach similar to what we have in the West. You know what I mean? So a lot of the transition of bringing Buddhism into this culture has been somehow integrating our psychological approach with the wisdom of the Buddhist lineages. And it sounds like he got a crash course if he was living in New York City.
He sure did. He sure did. And in fact, in that talk, he talked about his very first Dharma talk in his little apartment. 5 people came. He had put an ad in the newspaper. 5 people came, and he gave a talk on seeing all beings as our precious mother. And one of the young women there clearly was very disturbed by that teaching,
Yeah.
and never came back. And so he thought long and hard about that. Why is that so? And then when he and I became good friends, he told me, I didn't know there was such a thing as trauma,
Hmm.
despite having been extremely traumatized.
Hmm.
But he was open, right? Open to thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
David,
Yep.
oh, oh, I just wanted to add something, Pilar and David, that when I was training in object relations, I can't remember the name of a writer, but there had been some research about the understanding of personhood being so different in Western cultures and in Asian cultures.
Hugely. Yeah, I mean, in Western cultures, we have basically a psychological self. And Western practitioners of Buddhism tend to bring that sense of self to their spiritual practice.
Hmm.
And in Buddhist cultures, there tends to be a communal sense of self, right? More of a we-go than an ego.
Hmm.
And it's very different. It's a very different self-experience.
Yeah, it's a complicated dance because often the Western students are coming to their meditation teacher with psychological problems.
Yes.
I remember hearing that Kala Rinpoche, his translator, through his translator, was said he was seeing a lot of students, and he said finally to his translator, "Doesn't anybody want to ask some questions about meditation?" Because they're asking him all these personal problems, life direction stuff, and you know.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing dance with both with students and with teachers of these traditions to try to find some way of really communicating and establishing that intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes, David, it's fascinating. And now, of course, we're living in a time where there are more teachers in all Buddhist traditions who were raised in the West. And so from the very beginning, they've been trying to bring the Dharma into conversation with psyche, with personal history and trauma, etc. So the Dharma will be changing. That's right, it's empty too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Great. Thank you.
thank you. Roger, hi.
Hello, thankful. Greetings. Um, Jonas had posted your presentation with him some 11 years ago, and so I watched a fair amount of it yesterday. Just picking up David's thread and what you were talking about is my first blush then, and now it's even so more lasting impressions that you kind of bridge this gap, if that's the word, between sort of this East and West traditions, psychoanalysis and Dharma practice. And that to me is, I'd love to hear more about that. That to me is just fascinating and compelling.
Roger,
Really
read.
exciting. Yeah. That's on my head on the list.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the question. I do feel just endlessly compelled by the conversation between these traditions, in part because the human experience is so complex. Right? I mean, I never would have imagined. I mean, as a New Yorker, I felt ready for a lot of complicated experience, but I'm not sure I imagined living through a pandemic and a war, right? And the last presidency. I mean, it's been a lot to grapple with. And so what I'm really finding is that we dearly need traditions that are on board with complexity. And both of these traditions are. They make no effort to simplify what we go through or our response to what we go through, but they really do have very different methods for working through our suffering. And in my experience, when you bring traditions into conversation, I mean, it's the same way when you bring people right into conversation, something new can happen. And usually that new thing breaking through is what's needed. Yeah. So it is connected to what we were just talking about with David, that we need something generative. We need traditions to keep changing, right? Keep responding to our changing circumstances. It is what the historical Buddha asked for. He said, let's teach the Dharma in every language. Let's see if we can align it with cultural difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
I want to make a plug for my new book here.
Please.
So this is an advertisement of My Dear Far Nearness. I chose this name of My Dear Far Nearness from Marguerite Porete, who died in 1310. The religious authorities actually executed her. And for what? For being a beautiful, whole woman person in medieval times, who had access to a deep sense of the complexity and the beauty of a human person. And so I'm always sad when I talk about her. I chose that name because there's a sense of what I was missing in mindfulness training was the devotional dimension. And love to me is something that transcends people. It's something that is. And so one of the things I explore in the book, Pilar, we haven't had a chance to talk about it, is what Christians call the second person of the Trinity. The second person is what Buber called the I-thou dimension rather than I-it, treating people in the way that you describe as I'm here, you're here, I'm here, you're here. That's the I-thou dimension. And so what I explore the emptying dimension of awareness and the I-thou dimension and the we-go dimension. That each of these three dimensions is a translation of what the Christian tradition calls the Holy Trinity. It's not out there, but it's within us. So we're circulating in these three dimensions, and it connects with the Trikaya and the Trimurti, and so that's we're headed into complexity, but also beauty and new understandings and curiosity.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
Mm.
I can't wait to read your book. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? We have a few more moments.
Mindy. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for both talks, the 11-year ago one and today's. I'm fascinated what you said about your teacher not knowing he had had trauma or not labeling it that way. And I'm just interested in what the two cultures, the two approaches, where you might think they came from, and is there something valuable and something lost from labeling something and focusing on it strongly?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why this Buddhist path has has really worked for me. I do see the freedom that's offered from not getting too fixated on suffering, right? From understanding it's human, it's normal, it's not a failure, right? We're not struggling because we're a nutcase. We're struggling because we're human, or we may have been traumatized because we're human. But one of the pitfalls of being psychologically minded is getting overly identified with the suffering and the trauma. And with my teacher, I mean, when he was first telling me about his history, I almost couldn't believe what he had lived through without feeling that it had been traumatic. I mean, he was raised simply to tolerate. You cope, right? And you don't inflame the suffering. Now, what I saw is that he had ended up too alone with certain traumas. And of course, I was always prying and wanting to learn more, which I think he appreciated, because in his community, he hadn't really been able to talk about it without it seeming self-obsessive or self-serving, right? And over time, I mean, here's an example throughout COVID. He keeps showing up, seeming to be perfectly okay and joyful, even though there was a huge amount of loss in his community in the early stages of COVID. You know, in congregate settings and the monasteries, it just swept through. But again, it didn't seem to pull him into depression, right? It didn't seem to yank him out of his trust in his own ability to see the good in the world or in himself. So it's just another place between the traditions that I really appreciate. I think we need to be able to see trauma and recognize it and work with it. I mean, he's definitely suffered, and I see the signs, I see the symptoms. But we also, I think, need spiritual tools toward that end, right? So that we trust we're more than our suffering. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you. Pilar, I don't want to let you go, but I think we should, because you've got I'm sure, a full day ahead, and some of us do too. But this has just been so wonderful to be with you. It's an honor, and I'm glad you're out there doing the work you're doing. It's beautiful.
Mm.
And I hope we can see each other again.
I would love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really, it's been a joy to be with you, and I hope to see you again before too long.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, you're in our prayers. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Everybody can unmute and say goodbye if you like.
Namaste.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Health and ease to you all.
Peace.
Bye.
Thank you. If anybody I just lost my screen. If you'd like to hang out for 5 or 7 minutes here to reflect together, 7.5 minutes.
Yeah, right. I'll get my clock. Stopwatch.
Yes. Anybody would like to hang out for a while and just reflect what comes up for you and what Pilar is sharing?
She was just wonderful, just wonderful.
Mm.
I love the richness of her language and her ability to really express so clearly very complicated stuff, and in very graspable, very approachable, very understandable way. She wasn't mystical at all. She was grounded and clear. I love that. Oh, she's still there.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm
Watch what I
receiving
say.
it all.
And
So much.
As a native New Yorker, I really appreciated your New York state of mind.
Thank you, Steve.
better than Frank Sinatra, that's for sure.
Where are you from, Steve?
Born and raised in Queens, and spent my early life there until the late 60s, early 70s.
Mm.
Went to college for a while there and saw a lot in my early teens.
Yeah.
Great experience. A lot of street wisdom.
Yes. Street Dharma, right?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
And then Steve has made the transition to being rooted in his work with
Absolutely.
landscaping. He's done beautiful landscaping all around our house. And
Oh,
retired now, but
oh, that's wonderful. It's good to meet you.
Oh, good to meet you as well. That was a wonderful session. Appreciate it very much.
So welcome. So welcome.
Lori, what do you think? Oops. How you doing, Lori?
I'm doing fine. I actually felt like it was Pilar, the way you described sort of the recognition of who we are and that we're not our suffering, but that we have to acknowledge and work with it. That clarified in such a simple way the journey that I've been on for the last, at least for the last 10 years. And it made me feel so hopeful. And because for a while I didn't know I was traumatized, and I was just mired in that and very reactive. I just was living out of my unconscious mind and not knowing I was doing it. And it also made me so grateful for the therapeutic and spiritual mentors, Jonas especially, that happened to find me right when I was ripe for dealing with all that, and just to have it encapsulated in such a clear way has, I don't know, it just feels very freeing. So thank you for that.
I also want to suggest Pilar's this book, To Heal a Wounded Heart.
Good heart.
It's so personally written, very different from Mixing Minds. And I was, pleasantly surprised that you could make that transition in your style of writing. Very beautiful. In your relationships with the Lama and Martine and your parents, it's so personal and draws me right into the story. So thank you.
I think this whole, and I really appreciate you bringing it forth so clearly, our relationship with suffering. It's just somehow that we want to deal with it, we don't want to identify with it. That somehow that to me is a way to discern our path through these very, very difficult times, whether they be personal or national or world. There's something about that speaks to me of a way through, keeping whole, but not getting lost, not getting mired down, and not getting hopeless, which is a great temptation. And you have lots of heart. I didn't mean by my question that you didn't.
Well, Annie, I want to thank you for raising that question, because I've always had trouble with this distinction between mind and heart. They just all are muddled up for me in one process.
Mm-hmm.
And so I very much appreciated the focus on mind in this hour, because I've never been able to separate feelings from thoughts. They all seem to be all tangled up together.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes when I was a psychotherapist, and I'm not anymore, but sometimes I'd be sitting with someone who's talking about something quite pleasantly, and I start to feel anxious. And then the question for me is that my anxiety, or is it the other person's anxiety? And sometimes I've discovered that my body knows something before I know it. And so, yeah, body, mind, heart, spirit, soul, if you will. I don't know what soul is, but I'm attracted to. I'd like to find out if I live long enough.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Would this be a good time? It's 5 minutes before it, so we're a little bit beyond time. Maybe can we say so long for now? What do you think?
Oh, no,
No.
it's much too early.
Let's just hang out all day.
Yeah, we could. We could. I really don't have anything, but
Sure.
yeah,
You're the convener and the dismisser.
I'm the hoster.
You're the host.
Things
The
come
host
up.
with the most.
Things come up when you're hosting that you allow for or don't allow for. That's a subtle practice. But I know that I really, I love you, Pilar, and I love your work, and I support your work, and I'm glad you're a light out there in the world right now. You know, the work is so anonymous. Very few people know what you're doing of those 7.5 billion. But I hope they do someday, because this is really important conversation. It's a bridging conversation across the globe, between cultures, between traditions. Betweenness is something sacred, the betweening power of love. So
I receive your love, and I love you too, Jonas. And I've loved being here. Really, this is just such a kind, welcoming group, Sangha. So thank you. Thank you for being with me this morning, and I'll be thinking of you all and hope to reconnect soon.
okay,
Thank you so much for coming.
Yes.
Thank you.
thank you.
Pilar.
Blessings, everyone.
Yes, bountiful blessings. Take good care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye now.